For the first time, a majority of Americans support sending U.S. troops to help defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Now, that was found in a recent Chicago Council on Global Affairs survey. And here to talk with me about this interesting development is a prominent expert on Taiwan in the United States, Brown Professor of Political Science at Davidson College, Professor Shelley Rigger. Professor Rigger is also the author of Why Taiwan Matters, Small Island Global Powerhouse. Professor Rigger, it's great to be able to speak with you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So what do you think of this increase of support for Taiwan among Americans?
Well, I think it's always good news when Americans are engaged and willing to take a position, first of all, because this is an issue that a lot of Americans don't necessarily have a lot of information about. And in fact, asked, what's the nature of US-Taiwan relations? The largest number of people said, I don't know enough to have an opinion. So, it's not something that people spend as much time thinking about as I do, and maybe as you do.
Right.
So, it's always encouraging to kind of see that people are paying a little bit more attention, or at least are willing to voice a more supportive view. On the other hand, I would not give too much importance to the changes from the previous survey to this survey, just because I think that some of the results in the survey suggest that this is kind of a pretty thin result, that while it's maybe a kind of gut reaction, I want to do something to help out Taiwan. The rest of the survey doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that people are well informed or are making a kind of coherent case for why the U.S. should, maybe make its policy a little bit more favorable to Taiwan.
So I think one interesting statistic was that 69% said they favor Taiwan becoming an independent country. And for us, if we were to declare independence, China would definitely invade us. So I think that kind of does show that people don't understand all the consequences of these different questions. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. And I also found the wording of the independence question, the wording of the question basically says, Taiwan is a self-governed place, even though the PRC claims it. The U.S. treats Taiwan as a separate entity. Do you think we should recognize Taiwan independence? It almost seemed like the question was saying the U.S. treats Taiwan as an independent country, so should we treat Taiwan as an independent country? It was a very leading question, I thought. And it gave no sense of the trade-off that you just mentioned that I think would have maybe, caused people to answer differently. And this is why survey research as a guide to foreign policy is so difficult, because very often people don't think about the trade-offs that are involved in a particular foreign policy decision until they're actually faced with the consequences. And then they say, oh my, how did that happen? So I think what we see here is we see a rising sympathy for Taiwan, a sense of, hey, this is a good place, and the U.S. should do what it can to take care of Taiwan. And what that means is that then the sort of public opinion context, if the U.S. were to have to take some action to defend or support Taiwan, would be more favorable, right? So if you go into a crisis and 80% of the people in your country say, we don't want to get involved, then even if the president recognizes it's in the interest of the U.S. to get involved, it's going to be harder. If you have 70% saying, go for it, then in the moment of crisis, the president is still going to have to make a decision based on national interest. No U.S. president goes to war solely on the grounds of public opinion, but it does kind of change the context. And so I think that, it's not an insignificant finding. It's just one that I wouldn't recommend that, Taiwan independence advocates start saying, well, Americans all want us to be independent, so we should too. I think, we need to calm down and recognize that Americans who give that answer are not maybe thinking through the consequences in a way that they would if the moment actually arrived.
Now, I'm also curious, there's been a lot more Chinese military activity around Taiwan. Experts are debating if Beijing is serious about invading Taiwan sometime soon. What is your opinion on that?
A lot of discussion of this issue in U.S. policy circles, largely by people who don't follow Taiwan particularly closely, and some of whom I'm not even sure how closely they follow China, and certainly not PRC domestic politics. So I am more persuaded by positions like Paul Hare or Min Shin Pei, who are suggesting that, maybe we need to be a little bit more sober about how quickly we rush to the bandwagon that, China's attacking tomorrow. There's lots of good reasons why the PRC will refrain from taking military action against Taiwan. It is an extremely risky thing for them to do, and they know that. And so I think they have two problems. They have a military problem and they have a political problem. And their military problem is, how do we ensure that Taiwan does not slip farther away? In particular, how do we deter Taiwan independence? And I think a lot of the military activity that we see now is aimed at intimidating Taiwanese and kind of keeping Taiwan stuck where it is. The political problem of persuading Taiwanese to accept some kind of amalgamation or annexation into the PRC on Beijing's terms, that's a much harder question. And it doesn't actually really have a military solution. You can use force to compel people, but can you actually achieve your goal, which is national unification as Beijing sees it, which is a matter of people's affiliation to the, what Beijing understands to be the Chinese motherland? That's a political problem and a cultural problem and a social problem that can't be solved with military force. And so, I think I'm not as panicky as some of the other people that I talk to, because it seems to me that once again, the PRC is holding fire, and the job for us, especially in the U.S., is to not force their hand or not cause Beijing to believe that it has no other option than to take a military action.
That's interesting. I am still curious also about public sentiment in the U.S. about Taiwan. It seems that it's growing, right? Can you explain, is there any particular reason or events in the past half year or year that you think has influenced public sentiment about Taiwan?
So one thing that's definitely going on is U.S. favorability toward the PRC is diminishing. And for many people, there is this kind of awareness that Taiwan is a kind of alternative to the PRC, or that Taiwan stands with the U.S. as our relationship with mainland China deteriorates. But I don't know that that's exactly enough to create this upswelling of positive sentiment toward Taiwan, because knowing that you don't like China, or that, you're upset about things that are happening in China, doesn't necessarily give you an awareness of Taiwan as an alternative. Where I think the awareness of Taiwan as an alternative has come from is the COVID crisis, where many, many Americans are learning about Taiwan for the first time. And I'm experiencing this directly, because people say, "Oh, you study Taiwan. Well, how come they had such good success against COVID?" So, I think that Taiwan's gotten a lot of very positive attention in the U.S. and around the world for its COVID response. I know my friends in Taiwan, they say, "Oh, yeah, but then we had this COVID crisis of our own." And, yes, But unlike anybody else, you've managed to contain and prevent it from becoming uncontrollable in Taiwan. And now it seems as if the COVID crisis in Taiwan has receded, and there is the opportunity for Taiwanese to be vaccinated before, another wave comes along. And I think Taiwanese will be vaccinated, unlike many Americans who are, this has just become so political in the US. It's really tragic. So I think it's as much the positive attention that Taiwan has gained as a result of its successful response, and I still characterize Taiwan's response as successful even after this summer. Relative to almost every other country in the world, Taiwan's response has been very successful. People in the U.S. know that, and so I think that may be where the awareness of Taiwan, somewhat as an alternative to the PRC, but also as a sort of good story in its own right, may be coming from.
Well, that's great to know, because I know that, some people don't even know where Taiwan is or what the country stands for. So you think that it is increasing, this knowledge and positive understanding of Taiwan is increasing in the United States?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Taiwan has put a lot of effort into public diplomacy in the U.S., advertising, exhibitions, trying to get to know people. But COVID has raised its profile in multiple ways. One being just the amount of media attention that was given to Taiwan's positive or effective response to the COVID crisis, but then also so many people who were planning to do things in mainland China, finding themselves looking at Taiwan as the place that they could go. So all of our students, for example, at Davidson College, who were hoping to study Chinese last summer, are, they're now looking to Taiwan as the place to study Chinese. Mainland China is kind of closed for business, not business, not manufacturing business, still doing plenty of that, but it's not open to visitors. It's not open to students. So a lot of Fulbright scholars who were hoping to do work in mainland China ended up going to Taiwan. That's partly because the U.S. Suspended the Fulbright program in the PRC. So I think that you're seeing a lot more kind of traffic to Taiwan, or people thinking about, when I get to go, that's where I will go. And again, that's a kind of side effect of COVID. The COVID pandemic has kind of interrupted a lot of trends that had a lot of momentum, including many Americans wanting to go to mainland China for different things. And I think Taiwan also has gained awareness as a result of that.
Well, that's great to know. And I think we deserve it. We have a lot of good things going for us. And just like you wrote in your book, right? Small island, global powerhouse. It's great that more and more people in America know about us and what we stand for, right? Democracy and freedom, and also public health, all these great things.
Yep. And, I've never known a person back in the old days, back in like the 80s and sometimes in the 90s, I would meet a business person who had been to Taiwan, and, there was too much cigarette smoke and pollution in the factory, and, they didn't have a good time. But everybody that I send to Taiwan, from among my students, my colleagues that I've encouraged to go, other colleagues that, find themselves, and my family who have visited me, my friends who have visited me in Taiwan, everybody falls in love with the place. And, maybe that's partially the sort of starry-eyed foreigner, but Taiwan is really a great place to visit. And many of my scholar friends who didn't need to be in the U.S. last year for teaching because they were teaching online, a number of people either stayed in Taiwan or went to Taiwan and sort of rode out the pandemic from Taiwan, teaching their classes on Zoom in the middle of the night, because they felt like that was a better environment for them and their children than the places they lived in the United States.
It was pretty good for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well,
and still, at the worst moment in Taiwan's outbreak, it was still better than where I live in North Carolina.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And we were thinking, oh, this means it's time to get back to normal because it was so much better than it had been before.
Well, Professor Rigger, you're a great fan of Taiwan, I know, and it's great to be able to speak with you about public sentiment in America about Taiwan. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed this.
I've been speaking with a prominent expert on Taiwan in the United States, Professor Shelley Rigger, who is a Brown Professor of Political Science at Davidson College and also the author of Why Taiwan Matters, Small Island, Global Powerhouse.
And a new book just came out in June, if I can plug that, called The Tiger Leading the Dragon, How Taiwan Propelled China's Economic Rise. It's about Taishan and all the ways that Taiwanese participation in the PRC economy has transformed not only Chinese business, but also religion, philanthropy, popular culture, consumer habits, all that kind of stuff in mainland China. So check it out.
That's great. Our next interview.
Okay, fantastic.